I've been making games for about a year and a half now, but never really had the courage to take part in a game jam. For anyone who doesn't know, a game jam is a timed event with a secret theme that's revealed only after the jam starts. You typically have a week or less to take a game from an idea to a fully playable release. Then, a bunch of players rate your game across a variety of categories. When I saw the Blackthorn Prod Game Jam slip into my feed, I told myself, this is the one. I would commit to submitting something, anything. The first day was all about creating new ideas. My wife and I work together a lot, but have vastly different opinions about what makes a game fun. I'm more into games with fast-paced action and clear goals, while she's more about abstract experiences, usually stuff best played in VR. We tore apart each other's hopes and dreams while writing everything down. Half a day later, we landed on something we both agreed might be pretty fun, a food delivery game. With our idea roughly mapped out, I fired up a new project in Unity. That's about all I did, but it felt like a solid place to end the first day. On day 2, I got to work prototyping a simple game with basic Unity cubes. I knew fast movement would be the core focus, but wasn't sure how I'd handle navigation. I set up placeholders for a minimap and compass, then continued on with fine-tuning the controls. Looking back, I probably should have spent more time here. 90% of our feedback pointed out how bad the controls felt. I find movement to be one of the hardest things to get right. I usually like to have fresh players provide some feedback, but there just wasn't enough time during the jam. Anyways, I had the basic beginnings of a working game by the end of day 2. It just wasn't fun yet. My goal in day 3 was to create a system for customers to place orders, then alert the player to pick up and deliver them to the correct house. Basically, the plan was for the game to flow something like this. First, a customer would place an order at a restaurant, and a countdown timer would begin. The player would then go to that restaurant and pick up the order. Finally, the player would drive that order back to the customer's home and deliver the order. Similar to deliveries in IRL, the customer satisfaction decreases as time increases. Sticking with the jam's theme, the less time you take, the more money you make. Now that the game was starting to feel sort of fun, it was time to revisit navigation. My first instinct was to slap on a minimap. The problem with that is it instantly shifted focus away from the player and onto a map. I also didn't want the UI to get too complex, but needed to provide a lot of information to the player fast. After several iterations, I finally came up with a solution. It might not be perfect, but I decided to include simple arrows within each customer's order. After a few playtests, it became clear this would be a good direction to go, but still not great. The map needed to be smaller. Instead of removing destinations, we opted to zoom the camera out. Since this was an RC-style delivery game, it actually felt better all around for the world to be tiny. As the week was drawing to a close, a clear flaw came into focus. Driving was just boring. The game needed something else to keep the player engaged, but it was getting too late for any major changes. I originally tried to add an e-brake for drifting, but the existing physics system made it difficult to implement smoothly. Ultimately, I scrapped that whole idea. With time running out, the next thing that popped into my head was to give the player some control over the speed. Luckily, boosting the little car was a very easy feature to add and seemed to fill the empty void. It's not perfect, but felt better than not having it. This also ramped up the game's pace significantly. By day 6, all the 3D models were added into the game. Now that we could finally play using our final assets, it became pretty clear that some adjustments were needed. An intersection was added and models were moved around until gameplay felt smooth. I also created a first pass at music. It sounded fun and quirky, but didn't give off the fast-paced vibe we were going for. While thinking more about the music, I went ahead and made all the sound effects. Most stuff was done using my mouth, then imported into FL Studio and tweaked until it sounded okay. With sound effects mostly complete, I was able to feel out the audio a bit better. I went back to the music and eventually landed on a techno beat that reminds me of racing games I played as a kid. It seemed to fit the intensity we were reaching for without being too overpowering. By the end of day 6, everything seemed to fall into place as best it could within the 1-week time limit. The initial plan for day 7 was to simply test builds for Mac, Windows, and Linux, then submit the game. Testing went well thanks to Unity's ability to quickly create builds for multiple platforms, but our game wasn't going up without a fight. As fate would have it, release day turned out to be the most stressful day of all. As soon as I tested my game on an ultra-wide screen, my UI went nuts. While I was developing the game, I made sure to test a variety of resolution scales, but now all of a sudden 80% of my interface was just gone. It was like the biggest fear of something really bad happening in the final hours came true. It took way longer than I'd care to admit, but eventually I figured out that most of my UI objects were just on the wrong Z-axis. Other monitors didn't seem to care about this, but with less than 2 hours left in the jam, I got to work resetting all my objects' positions. 30 test builds later, I finally had something that I felt good about. With just about an hour left to spare, I quickly uploaded everything we had and officially submitted our game into the Blackthorn Prod Game Jam. It was a much closer call than I wanted, but I could finally let out a giant sigh of relief. I slept so great that night. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give that like button a gentle tap. I try to make new games every other week, so be sure to subscribe to see more. Until next time, you take care of yourself. Bye.